Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy, where we bring you the stories behind the health headlines.
This podcast is brought to you by Redix Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Body Cream. 800-345-7339, on the web at uttercream.com. At least 10 million Americans have osteoporosis, and millions more are at risk of this condition that increases the chance of a fracture. This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Each year, there are more than 1 million fractures due to osteoporosis. Recovering from a hip or spine fracture is challenging. While there are medications for osteoporosis, they can have unpleasant side effects. Are there other options for osteoporosis prevention?
One surprisingly effective approach is yoga. Research shows that conscientious practice of certain traditional yoga poses can increase bone density.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, find out about yoga for osteoporosis and other bone and joint problems.
First, this news.
In the People's Pharmacy health headlines, advanced prostate cancer seems to be on the rise. A new study found a 72% increase in metastatic disease between 2004 and 2011. Men between 55 and 69 years of age experienced a 92% increase in new cases of advanced prostate cancer over the last decade. Low-risk prostate cancer cases were down 37%. The researchers reviewed the medical records of over 760,000 men with prostate cancer. The researchers aren't certain whether the changes in aggressive prostate cancer are due to less vigilant screening of men without symptoms or to other unidentified factors that increase the likelihood of metastases. The current guidelines about PSA screening remain controversial. In light of the new data, men at risk should talk to their physicians about whether increased vigilance is appropriate.
The Mediterranean diet has gained quite a reputation of late. A new analysis of 56 studies of the Mediterranean diet found that people following this eating pattern have a lower likelihood of developing diabetes, heart attacks, strokes, and breast cancer. To be included in the research, a study had to have at least 100 participants who were adhering to at least 2 of the following 7 components. More monounsaturated fat, usually from olive oil or nuts, with little if any animal fat like butter. Lots of vegetables and fruits, plenty of legumes such as peas, beans, and lentils, mostly whole grains, moderate amounts of red wine, limited intake of dairy products, and reduced consumption of meat, with fish as a substitute. The research can't demonstrate cause and effect, but by now the consensus is that even a high-fat Mediterranean-type diet is good for the heart, the brain, and various other organs. The study authors suggest trying to eat this way at home by using olive oil rather than other fats and focusing on plant foods, especially vegetables, beans, and seeds. Mediterranean-style menus from Italy, Spain, France, Turkey, and Israel are delicious, so adopting such a plan shouldn't mean sacrificing flavor.
The idea that we need not fear fat is supported by another study that scrutinized the links between saturated fat, polyunsaturated fat, monounsaturated fat, and carbohydrate consumption on the risk of type 2 diabetes. The researchers analyzed more than 100 trials with 4,220 participants. Replacing calories from carbs with sat-fat calories had no effect. Replacing those carbs with monounsaturated fat, such as from olive oil or avocado, though, lowered HbA1c, insulin levels, and insulin resistance. Polyunsaturated fats instead of carbs also lowered HbA1c and fasting insulin. Polyunsaturated fats found in vegetable oils improved the ability of the pancreas to secrete insulin. The authors suggest that people would benefit from adding more vegetable oils, nuts, fish, and avocados to their diets and eating less meat, refined grains, starches, and sugars.
Some women apparently take hormone replacement therapy after menopause not only to ease hot flashes, but to keep their brains working well. There's a belief that HRT is good for cognitive functioning. A randomized controlled trial, including almost 570 healthy women between 41 and 84 years of age, found no connection between cognitive decline and hormone therapy versus placebo. The women were randomly assigned to take estradiol or a look-alike placebo for 5 years. They also used vaginal progesterone gel or a placebo gel. The women had their cognitive function and verbal memory tested at the beginning of the study, halfway through, and at the close of the study. All the women improved their verbal memory scores, presumably as a result of practice, but there were no differences between women on estradiol and those on placebo. It also did not matter whether the women were experiencing hot flashes or not, or how many years since menopause they started on HRT.
Children who spend hours in front of a television may be setting themselves up for osteoporosis later in life. A new study from Australia monitored TV habits of more than 1,000 kids. Those who watched the most had lower bone mineral density when they reached 20. Sitting for hours in front of a TV screen or computer monitor may put people at risk for weakened bones as they age. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. Yoga is no longer an exotic practice. There are studios in almost every community, and people of all ages are participating in this ancient healing tradition.
Yoga is not often thought of as exercise, much less exercise that could strengthen your bones. Yet our guest today has found that conscientious practice of certain yoga poses can improve bone mineral density and reduce fractures.
Dr. Loren Fishman is Medical Director of Manhattan Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation in New York City. He's the author of 10 books, including Healing Yoga and Yoga for Osteoporosis. He's on staff at Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons and associate editor of the journal Topics in Geriatric Rehabilitation. His website is sciatica.org.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Loren Fishman.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
It's so nice to have you with us. And Dr. Fishman, I have to ask you to explain yet again, what is a physiatrist? Because most of our listeners have never heard of it, and they go, well, is that some kind of weird psychiatry we've not ever run into before?
Okay, well, it's closer to piano mover in the phone book than to psychiatrist. It's a field that really grew up to promote function as opposed to structure. For example, they have found that in the grisly circumstance that they must amputate a knee, it's better off to amputate it short than long. Not preserving as much tissue, but giving the person, the amputee, much greater function, ability to walk and sit and even run. So the physiatrist focuses on function. That's what we do. We are peripheral neurologists, medical orthopedists. We don't do surgery. It really grew up after World War II, where hundreds of thousands of GIs were rescued, would have otherwise perished, but were saved basically by the helicopter. The field owes its origins to the helicopter. And these grievously injured people came back to the United States and were, quite an obligation to FDR and to Harry Truman. And as a consequence, they invited a number of eminent internists and surgeons to form a new discipline devoted to rehabilitating people who were injured in the war, basically. And it's spread out now. In spite of all of our conflicts, we don't have nearly the sort of volume of that type of injury now. And so automobile accidents, neurological illnesses of all sorts, back pain, sports injuries are all within our purview.
Well, I'm guessing that another name for what you do is like physical medicine or sports medicine, because there are now a lot of folks who specialize in sports injuries.
Well, that's what we call ourselves, really, physical medicine and rehabilitation. That's the other name. So you're absolutely right.
Dr. Fishman, we are planning to ask you a lot about yoga today. And that's a bit of a jump off from physiatry, which we were just talking about. So how did you get interested in yoga?
Well, I went to India. I was studying philosophy at Oxford in England. I wandered into a bookstore and found a man named Patanjali, who wrote the first book on yoga called the famous Yoga Sutras, who also was a grammarian and discovered, as far as I know, the first one to ever codify what these funny sounds that come out of our mouths might mean, diagramming them into verbs and nouns and such. And he was also a yogi, and he was also a physician. So he was three things: a physician, a grammarian, and a yogi.
Give us a time frame for his life. How long ago did he live?
Oh, about the time of Jesus.
Okay.
Anyway, so I went to India, I was studying mathematics at Oxford, and hoping to find the foundations of mathematics, believing that it was a rule-like activity, quite like grammar, well-formed sentences, parts of speech, and so on. It seemed to be a good place. But I was in India about 3 weeks when I realized any 3-year-old brought up in speaking Hindi was going to know more Sanskrit than I would ever learn. And so I began searching for people of liberation, enlightened type people. And I met a large number of them, amongst others, B.K.S. Iyengar, who died just about a year ago at age 93 or 94, it's uncertain, and was a master yogi, was better at yoga than anything I'd ever seen before. I was always interested in yoga, but with him I just went and spent a year with him, rented a room in a hotel and went to everything he did. And he was a very generous and giving and highly intelligent man. And I learned it. When I came back to the U.S. to go to medical school, which I always wanted to do, it seemed to me that yoga had a place in medicine. Now, in ancient times, it certainly did as well, but in the interim, from the Middle Ages until the late 20th century, it did not. And when I became a physiatrist, which, as we've said, does involve physical activity, as opposed to the chemistry that's involved in medicine and the physical act of cutting that's involved in surgery. This is getting people to do things that will help them. And yoga has so many benefits. It seems so natural. When I started out doing it in the 1980s, I would have to say, what I'm showing you now is a yoga-like maneuver. Because if I'd said it was yoga, they would have thought me some kind of quack, I think. But in fact, I do give injections. I send people to surgery when I think it's appropriate. I'm a regular doctor. But I find that yoga is extremely helpful and has so few side effects. Has good side effects rather than the kind you're accustomed to seeing.
Dr. Fishman, when you started, in a sense, practicing yoga with your patients, it was not mainstream. And now here we are, 30, 40 years later, and it is mainstream. I mean, it seems like almost every corner there's a yoga mat someplace or other. And people, tend to think of it as, well, it's good for you, but is it exercise? Because, a lot of people are caught up in the exercise craze. It's good for them, helps them lose weight, helps lower their blood pressure. But is yoga exercise?
Well, it is doing something physically. In that sense, it certainly is. Whatever else it is exercise. Is it calisthenics? The answer to that is no. Yoga has as far as I can see, and this is just my opinion, as far as I know, it's not widely held. What yoga was developed as, the kind of what we call yoga, hatha yoga, is one of 12 branches of what is really serious philosophy in the East. And yoga itself has 8 limbs to it, like 8 branches of its own. And the kind of thing that we do, the asana, the physical postures, are only one of those 8. And as far as I can tell, here comes my opinion, it really developed more or less as a study break from meditation. The real aim of yoga, it doesn't have much to do with doing these postures, except insofar as these postures ready you for the contemplative, meditative processes that are really the practices that are the heart of yoga. There's a moral element, there's the physical part, there's the breathing part. That's 4. The other 4 are all mental disciplines.
Dr. Fishman, you've suggested that you were interested in exploring yoga's place in medicine. So what is yoga good for?
Yeah. A great number of things. I mean, we just published a study, a 10-year study of 741 people, in which I made a little DVD, about a 10-minute DVD, and distributed it to these people after getting them to have some blood tests and getting an old DEXA scan, which is a measure of bone mineral density, and then taught them the yoga. They're from all over. Some are from Thailand and Samoa and Serbia and you name it. And strongly recommended they see a yoga teacher and get another DEXA scan and an X-ray. And then 2 years later, after doing the yoga every day, we had a bulletin board, we had a newsletter to keep the people involved and interested. And they wrote to each other quite a bit, too. Then we did another DEXA scan and another X-ray, and we found it was really quite spectacularly effective. We did first a pilot study because some said that some of the things I was doing were very dangerous. So first I had 200 people, about 100 of which didn't do yoga and 100 of which did. All of them had DEXA scans when we started. And the 100 that did yoga would come to my office every week, and I would teach them the yoga along with a helper. And then again, 2 years later, same thing, we did another DEXA scan. And we found both in the pilot study, which was, I think, 18 people that actually completed the thing, and in the larger study, that yoga really significantly helped increase the bone mineral density in their spines and in their femurs and in most of the statistical measures in the hip. So unlike the medicines, which, I mean, one has to congratulate and be thankful to the drug companies for doing beautiful research into the underlying physiological mechanism. How does the bone respond to make more bone? What happens when people lose bone? They've really understood it so much more than anyone ever has come close to. However, the medicines that have been developed to this point have side effects that are not desirable. They're not so good. Some are not good for the stomach. Some cause heart attacks and strokes and pulmonary emboli. Some cause calcification of the aorta. None of them are without these side effects. But the side effects of yoga are better balance, improved posture, greater strength, widened range of motion, and lower anxiety, all of which contribute to falls. And falls are perhaps the greater villain in the piece even than the bone mineral density. Very few people will fracture anything without even having terrible posture and fracturing their spine or having bad balance and falling. So yoga attacks both of these very effectively, and I want to say attack is probably the wrong word, benefits both your bone mineral density and your ability to stand straight and not to fall.
You're listening to Dr. Loren Fishman. He's a physiatrist who is medical director of Manhattan Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. He's on the staff of the Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons, and he's associate editor of the journal Topics in Geriatric Rehabilitation. His books include Yoga for Osteoporosis and Healing Yoga. His website is sciatica.org.
We need to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll find out who participated in the study Dr. Fishman conducted on yoga for osteoporosis.
How much time does it take to get a benefit from yoga?
We'll learn about the poses that can stimulate osteocytes to make more and stronger bone and improve your posture.
And we'll also get the story on doing yoga after the age of 40. Is it safe?
And we know that drugs to fight osteoporosis have some side effects. What about yoga? What are its side effects?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you value the health information you get when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com. Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that deeply moisturize to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. The number is 800-345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is 1043. That number again, 800-732-2334, online at peoplespharmacy.com.
We're talking about yoga and its impact on bone strength. Each year, more than 300,000 people are hospitalized with a hip fracture. The financial cost is huge, but the cost in mobility and mortality is far greater. Hip replacement surgery is also a growth industry as baby boomers age. There are 53 million Americans with weakened bones at risk for fracture. Although there are drugs to treat osteoporosis, they can cause side effects. What other options do people have to keep their bones strong?
Our guest today is Dr. Loren Fishman, Medical Director of Manhattan Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation in New York City. He's author of 10 books, including Healing Yoga and Yoga for Osteoporosis. He's on the staff at Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons and associate editor of the journal Topics in Geriatric Rehabilitation. His website is sciatica.org.
Dr. Fishman, we're fascinated to learn about the study that you conducted using yoga to counteract osteoporosis. And I'm wondering if you could review with us a little bit, please, who participated in the study? Was there a control group? And exactly what poses, yoga poses, did these people do?
Okay, well, the people participated who were willing to commit. I asked them to do two things when they started. First, you must do the poses every day. And secondly, you must tell the truth when I ask you, did you do all the poses? So that was all that was required. Then they had some blood tests, which had to be normal. I tested a number of hormones. I tested their general metabolic profile and other such things. I tested their urine NTX, a slightly esoteric test to determine how quickly they are breaking down their bones. And then anyone who did this, I gave them the DVD free, and they started doing the yoga. Again, as I say, I tried to encourage them to see a yoga teacher one-on-one in order to get this started. Because while yoga itself is mainstream, using yoga for medical purposes really still is not. So that's who participated in it. There was no control group. I couldn't call people up and say, I'm going to ask you not to do yoga. It was an unfunded, any money involved in the study, I must say, I put out myself. I made the DVD, I did all the calls, or I had to sometimes pay somebody to do some of the work. But it was not a funded study, although I think such studies should be. So instead of doing a control, I did a crossover study. That was another condition, that they had to have another DEXA scan from 2 years before entering the study. So I could compare what happened in the 2 years before they started the study up to the time that they started, a 2-year period, from the time they started the study to 2 years later, another 2-year period. And it's called a crossover design, and it's statistically quite powerful. Our statistician, who is a full professor of biostatistics up at Harvard, is a guy who isn't going to fool around, and he found it quite statistically significant. People were surprised. It was significant to 0.0001, which means it would happen by chance 1 in 10,000 times. That's the usual medical criterion for efficacy is 0.05, which is 5 in 100. It would occur by chance 5 times in 100. So this was pretty knockdown, hard stuff.
Now, Dr. Fishman, out of curiosity, how much time did people have to devote to these postures each day, to these poses?
It was 10 minutes. We did the postures. A friend of ours who was an actress, sort of an understudy on Broadway, and some friends who were up at the Columbia Film School and associates from Harvard who were actual filmers themselves, all got together to make this DVD. And we decided that it should be 10 minutes so that people who were rushed and pressed in their time wouldn't have to waste their whole day doing this or devote too much of it to this. And the poses, There are some standing poses. I can give you the names of them if you like, but I mean, it's been published. It's out there, and Jane Brody wrote an article about it, in which she mentions the poses in the New York Times. But I can tell you it's the triangle pose. And the order does not seem to make any difference. It's just the stresses of the bones that are involved. I should say that the bones react to stress by producing more bone. It's an ancient law of bone, more than 100 years old, called Wolff's Law, WOLFF''S. And the law is that the architectonic of a bone, the structural support of a bone, corresponds to the lines of force to which that bone has been exposed. And so these poses that I'm about to tell you are all ones that stress either the hip or the spine or the femur or any two or all three of them. It starts out with the triangle pose, and it involves also the twisted triangle pose. You can see how that would work in this way. It involves the side angle pose. Sanskrit is the Parsvakonasana pose. So there you got three of them already, okay? Now, the other poses we involved were Matsyendrasana and Marishasana, which are twisting poses. Supta Padangustasana, which is literally in Sanskrit, it's hand to big toe pose. And there are two versions where you lie on your back and you bring your one foot up as high as it goes with your knee straight. And then you do the other, and then 1 foot off to the side as far as it goes and as far down towards the floor as possible.
Now, what's the corpse?
And then the other.
What's the corpse pose? That doesn't sound very appealing.
Well, it is very appealing, and it's very difficult. You lie there still on your back, breathing softly, and Mr. Iyengar says it's the most difficult pose because you must control your mind when you do it. If your mind wanders and you think of plans and ideas and regrets and fantasies and so on, you're not doing it. Your mind must be as quiet as a corpse, and that ain't easy.
No, it's not.
That's not easy.
I'm having a hard time understanding how these poses actually can stimulate osteocytes and bone-making cells. Because when I think about doing exercise, I think about jumping rope, I think about playing tennis, I think about doing all of the things that, stress bones. How does yoga, which seems so gentle, stress bones so that it builds more cells?
All right. Well, actually, our muscles are stronger than gravity. People are always talking about weight-bearing exercise being so good. And gravity is indeed a force, and you can see its effect on the femur, for example. But our muscles are much stronger than gravity. I mean, I can prove it to you. If this were a TV, I would show you, but I'll just tell you. Raise your arm. We are stronger than gravity. That's the whole point in having a muscle. And yoga involves one set of muscles often pitted against another. So you generate many times more stress and force on the bone, both compression and bending side to side and twists. In all three dimensions, you develop much more stress and strain with yoga, and therefore the bones respond. There are two kinds of cells in the bone, the osteocyte, which you already alluded to, Joe, that builds bone, and the osteoclasts, which gobble up bone and turn it back into solution, take the proteins and the minerals and return them to the general circulation. And those cells are sort of quiescent until you get to be about 40. And then those cells seem to predominate. Before that time, it's the osteocytes that make more bone than is swallowed up by the osteoclasts. And so the job of yoga after the age of 40, or before in certain unusual conditions, is to stimulate the osteocytes to overcome the destroying influence of the osteoclasts. And yoga does it. That's the way yoga does it. It's Wolff's Law. Some obsessive physiologist wanted to see how long do you have to stress a bone in order to stimulate this response. Answer, somewhere between 12. 12 seconds is enough to do it. And then after 72 seconds, you get no more additional stimulation. So if you do it for 3 hours and 72 seconds, it's no better than doing it for 72 seconds. So our poses we held for 30 seconds. And holding the pose appears to be of greater value, especially when one group of muscles is, conflictual with another, doing the opposite thing, agonist and antagonist. That seems to really be what grew the bones to be stronger. The controversial thing we did is twists, where many people said, oh, that's very dangerous with osteoporosis. But we found in these 741 people, 83% of whom had osteoporosis or osteopenia, and average age 68.4, there were no fractures. There were no serious injuries of any kind. I mean, there were plenty of fractures of people who fell, out of their car or something, but with regard to yoga, there were none.
Dr. Fishman, that's really an important finding, I think, because I don't know if this is still true, but certainly 10 years or so ago, when a person was diagnosed with osteoporosis, newly diagnosed with osteoporosis, the usual advice was, well, don't do anything vigorous. Don't,
yes.
Don't, because if you move, you might break something.
Exactly.
Which, is quite frightening, and I think frightened a lot of people, women in particular, into not moving at all.
Well, the same thing used to happen with back pain. If you had terrible back pain, they'd say, stay in bed. But in fact, staying in bed all day is one of the things to which we are least accustomed in our lives. And you could also get back pain from staying in bed that long and from doing nothing. Well, let me tell you about a person. He was 54 years old. He had testicular cancer and had to have both testicles removed, an orchiectomy. His bone mineral density declined and declined. He became osteoporotic at age 54 when we first encountered him, okay? Then he went to the doctor, and by 56, the doctor had started to say to him, you really shouldn't do any weight-bearing exercise. Your bones are getting too fragile for that. And the man got so angry, he quit the doctor, stopped taking the medicine, which wasn't doing him any good anyway, and started doing yoga. And over the next 6 years, from 56 to 62, you could watch the not-so-gradual gain, the marching upward of his bone mineral density. And today, he's not osteoporotic, he's not osteopenic. Not only is he in the normal range, but he's a very good yogi.
Well, this brings up an interesting issue because a lot of people think of yoga as a female thing. This is what women do. And the idea of guys doing yoga, it seems like, they would, they're going to go and hang out at the gym and lift weights and, work on the machines. And I think that's a misconception. The idea that yoga can be helpful, especially for men. A lot of men with prostate cancer, for example, are now being put on hormone suppression therapy so they don't have much testosterone. People who are on prednisone are going to be much more vulnerable to osteoporosis, whether they're male or female. And so the idea that it's entirely possible that this is for everyone is beginning to be mainstream.
Well, they say, I read this last week, that there are now 37 million people who do yoga in the United States. That's about 15%, I think. It's above 10 anyway. It's quite a large number. And the real point, I think, of doing yoga is not competitive. And that's why the men shy away. The men, we men, we're out to prove ourselves all day long and half the night. We want to show how great we are. And yoga is one of these seemingly passive activities. Actually, it's not passive at all. You're actually getting control of your mind. The passive one is the one who lets his mind tell him what to do all the time instead of considering it. But it's a higher passivity, shall we say. And the yoga is not that way at all. I saw, coming from a lecture I gave at Columbia, and I saw a dog walking down Broadway with his leash in his mouth. I'd just given the lecture, and I said, that's yoga. Why didn't I see that earlier? Because that's exactly what it is. You take your body, and your mind gets your body to take your mind where it wants to go. That's what it is. And it hasn't appealed to a great number of males at this point. It's just the opposite of yoga in India, where it's very largely male. I mean, when I was in India, I think one of the great innovations that Mr. Iyengar made was to have males and females in the same room. It was pretty well verboten, and you either had one or the other, and mostly males. And it's kind of the same inversion that you see about yoga being mental in India and physical here.
So, Dr. Fishman, could you go back and summarize the findings of your osteoporosis study? How good was yoga at strengthening bone?
Yoga was significantly better at strengthening the bones, raising bone mineral density, than the bisphosphonates, the most commonly used medications. It improved the bones more in the mean, on the average, than the most popular osteoporosis drugs do. Now, it improved the spinal bone mineral density greatly. It improved the femoral bone mineral density almost as well.
That's the thigh bone.
That's the thigh bone. And it improved the hip, which is a composite measure, which is done in various ways, and therefore the statistical accuracy was vitiated by the discrepancies between the different ways of doing it. But in 2 of the 3 statistical measures, it was significant there too. In 1, it was not. In addition, it produced no ill effects, such as fractures or serious injuries, sciatica or such things. And in addition to that, there is strong evidence elsewhere that these very poses produce better range of motion, greater strength, increased coordination, better balance, improved posture, and lowered anxiety. Now, these are all factors that bring one closer to falling, and to ameliorate them and benefit the patient in the way yoga does reduces their likelihood of fall.
Well, let me just confirm that I heard you correctly. You essentially said that yoga did not have any negative effects, any side effects, as it were, which we know is not the case for the bisphosphonate drugs.
That is true. That is absolutely true. I wanted to say there are 200 million people in the world that have osteoporosis or osteopenia right now. And a recent study by a very eminent doctor here at Columbia, Ethel Cyrus, found that only 1/4 of the Americans who have health insurance to pay for their medicines, over 100,000 people in this study, only 1/4 of them actually take the medicines. So 3/4 of them don't. So we are headed for a major health crisis here. It's sort of a public health issue, and yoga is a possible solution. It's almost free. It's, as I say, almost harmless and readily available.
You're listening to Dr. Loren Fishman. He's on the staff of the Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons. He's also associate editor of the journal Topics in Geriatric Rehabilitation. Dr. Fishman is the medical director of Manhattan Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. His books include Yoga for Osteoporosis and Healing Yoga. You'll find more information at his website, sciatica.org. There's a link to it from our website.
After the break, we'll find out whether yoga poses can help the spinal condition known as scoliosis.
Dr. Fishman did a study of people with scoliosis. How many volunteers did he have in the study?
We'll also find out how he discovered a pose that could help scoliosis, and we'll get the criteria you need to learn yoga for improving your own health.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. If you're enjoying this People's Pharmacy podcast, why not head over to our website? Well, you'll find a wealth of information on medications, conditions, home remedies, and ways to keep yourself healthy. You'll find it all at peoplespharmacy.com. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red X Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Foot Cream with shea butter, helping dry, cracked feet feel utterly soft and smooth. The number's 800-345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you could call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1043. That number again, 800-732-2334. You can also make that purchase online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today on the People's Pharmacy, we're talking about the medical benefits of yoga. Can it improve mobility? How good is the science?
Our guest is Dr. Loren Fishman, author of Yoga for Osteoporosis and Healing Yoga. Dr. Fishman is Medical Director of Manhattan Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. He's on the staff at the Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons. His website is sciatica.org.
Dr. Fishman, we've been talking a lot about poses and posture, and I think sadly, Americans have terrible posture. And I would have to admit that I'm one of them. I sit in front of a computer screen for hours on end. I'm hunched over, and it's probably the worst thing I could be doing for my back and for my body. But you just have to watch kids these days. They're looking at their phones or their screens. They've got backpacks on that have them hunched over as well when they're walking. And an awful lot of us spend more than half our day, sometimes 3/4 of our day, sitting in front of a computer. Tell us a little bit about why posture is so important.
Well, there's posture in two directions. There's the front-back posture, which is the slumping you're talking about right now. And what's bad about that is that it compromises your breathing. It's not very good for your heart or your stomach. I think a lot of heartburn is undoubtedly due to this. And I have a friend who's an actor who says, when I'm slumping on the stage, nobody, even my friends, don't know I'm up there. When I stand straight, they notice me right away. And so it has an effect on your mood, on your presentation to other people, and probably on the success or failure of your life. What does yoga do about that?
That's a pretty tall claim.
That's a pretty big claim. I mean, there are plenty of people who have no posture who do very well. I don't mean to say that it's the critical factor, but I believe it has an impact. I mean, you can think about the wonderful physicist who lives in a wheelchair because of his ALS. And posture doesn't seem to affect him very much, and there are obviously exceptions. But I'm going all the way. I think it really does affect who likes you, your most personal relations. So what do you do? What does yoga do? A couple of things. First, it gives you better range of motion so that you're able to stand and sit straight. Secondly, it makes you much more conscious of what the neurons in your joints are telling you. And third, it raises your spirit. It makes you feel more like being a noble, good person. Doesn't mean it goes all the way. Not so many people actually do it, but it gets you closer to it.
Well, that's an interesting
idea. Now, there's also posture. There's also posture in the right to left respect, scoliosis, which yoga, we have another study where we have about 260 people in that one, and we've published that one too already, showing that one yoga pose, Vasisthasana, the side plank, done on the convex side of the lumbar curve, reduces the lumbar curve by, in adults, by 38% in 6.8 months. And in children, the most common type being called adolescent idiopathic scoliosis, which is our doctorly way of hiding our ignorance. We don't know what it's from, and there it is. There, in these children, we can improve them 49.6% in the same 6.8 months, just under 7 months. That's the average. They don't all improve that much, but I Skype with people all over the world to do this, and very gratifying. Even with a Skype, they get better.
That is very impressive. How many adolescents were in the study?
In the first one, there were very few, like 7 or 8. That was like the pilot study. Currently, there are 52 adolescents. 53. I saw another one. 53 in the adolescents and 200 in the adults. So the yoga that we do, which I discovered totally by accident and desperation in a very serious old woman that was otherwise going to die. She had it so badly. That's another story. But this pose takes at the most 2 minutes a day, honest to goodness. And the results are almost spectacular. Not totally spectacular because there are a few special conditions for which it does not seem to work. But they are rare, and I would say at least 9 out of 10 people can use this method with great personal benefit. No braces, no surgery.
Dr. Fishman, I think we would like to hear the story of how you discovered this by accident. Can you tell us about your patient?
Yes, it was a good 20 years ago, and it was an old woman who was still working, although she should have been retired. She was in her 60s. She was a hospital administrator up in Connecticut. She came down to see me with her daughter, and she had the worst scoliosis perhaps I've ever seen, 108 degrees. And it was so severe that it was compromising her breathing. Her respiration was very shallow, and her heart, and she could not have surgery. She was beyond the point where surgery was too dangerous for her, given these compromises. So I said to her, look, let's do some yoga. Maybe we can slow it down. Who knows? Maybe we can stop it. And so I gave her poses, and then we changed the poses. It was a desperate measure. It was all she could do. And I finally hit her. There was one pose that seemed to be better than the rest in that she could do it, and it was replicable. She'd be able to do exactly the same thing at home. And it appeared, just calculating that it would be better for the muscles that would strengthen the bone. So I happened to be reading at the time some work by Buckminster Fuller, the architect, with the concept of a tensegrity structure, which is a structure held together by the tension between its parts. An example of that is a tent pole, or if you take a rural drive and you see an antenna up in the air, the cables that are holding it up paradoxically pull down. But if they pull down equally, the antenna stands vertical. There are other examples. A Native American teepee, the logs that make up the teepee do the same thing. Anyway, our spine is just such a structure when you think about it. It's held together side to side and front to back by muscles instead of cables pulling down. And so I realized hers were asymmetrical, and the strong side would be the side to which she bent. And the weak side would be the side that for hundreds of years has been thought to be the strong side, where there's a bulging of the ribs, because as you bend to the right, you have a curve to the left, and the ribs splay out like an Asian fan, like the spokes of a wheel. And they separate, and they separate the tissue behind it, and then they migrate back into the space created by their separation. And so I applied this to the woman, giving her the side plank to strengthen the side that was bulging out with the splayed out ribs. And you know what the saving grace was? Her daughter was a yoga teacher. So her daughter nagged her and pestered her, serious pestering here, day by day, so she actually did the pose. And she came back, and she certainly was no worse and felt good about that. And about a year later, she came back about every 3 months. About a year later, I looked at her, I said, maybe I'm kidding myself, but I think you're actually better. And she got an X-ray, and that 108-degree curve had turned into a curve of 68 degrees. So we danced around. She's still my patient. Now she's in her 90s. She's very fine. She doesn't have as much scoliosis. She has a little that she got. It's a different kind of scoliosis that she has now. And she's not able to do much about it, but she has kept it in check once we noticed it again. It's much, much smaller. That was the first case. And then I was so dumb, I didn't realize this would be of general interest until a neighbor of mine had a patient who had a cousin or something, and I did it on her, and it worked so well. And this intelligent woman from Yale said to me, people want to know about this. And that's when I started being serious about it, maybe 8 years ago, 10 years ago.
Now, Dr. Fishman, we've talked about osteoporosis and a condition that's a little less serious, osteopenia and scoliosis, but there are lots of other things that go wrong. For example, a lot of the people I play tennis with complain about sciatica. Then there are, of course, people who complain about their shoulder pain and their rotator cuff syndrome. And I'm just wondering what, if anything, yoga can do for things like, back pain, sciatica, rotator cuff syndrome, or shoulder pain in general.
Well, for the shoulder, we also developed something, and there's a story, if you want to hear the story. The first patient in this case was me. I was driving down 7th Avenue with my whole family in the car, 3 kids in the back, and a taxi cut me off, and I pulled the wheel as hard as I could to avoid having an accident. I avoided the accident, but I gave myself a major, what's called a massive rotator cuff. I was on a certain medicine which is prone to giving people these kind of tendinous injuries, and boy, it did it to me. it didn't hurt at all, but I couldn't lift my arm. I couldn't lift it to horizontal to save my soul. And we were going to visit some people. It didn't hurt at all. So we went to see the people. On the way back, I wrote myself a prescription, went to an MRI place after dropping off my wife and the kids, and brought the MRI the next day to the same surgeon that had done the right shoulder in a minor skiing accident. The surgeon took one look at it and said, I can't do this. This is a massive tear. You have to go to the great experts. And so I made an appointment with the great experts. And even though I'm a doctor, it took me a month to get the appointment. In the meantime, I missed yoga. So one day, I stood on my head with careful, being responsible with chairs around me and blankets and so on. And I was up there maybe half a minute, maybe a minute. My wife came downstairs. She saw me doing this. She said, Loren, what are you doing? And I quickly got off my head and stood up and was about to be sheepish about the whole thing when I said to her, hey, you know what? I can raise my arm. And I raised my arm clear over my head with no pain, both by raising it in front and by raising it off to the side. And I knew I hadn't healed my arm in a minute on my head. So I took my yoga shorts to work with me. When I got there, I stood on my head, and I had a wonderful physical therapist stick little needles into my muscles. It was called an EMG that reads off which muscles are active to come up with some theory of what happened. And what's happening there is you're trained when you stand on your head in the Iyengar way, by raising your shoulders away from the floor, you activate the subscapularis, another muscle, which supplants the one that's torn, the supraspinatus, and allows you to lift your arm painlessly. Now, I've taught this now to over 1,200 people, about 1,100 of whom have succeeded. The ones who don't succeed are musicians. And I had a baseball pitcher, a Hall of Fame. It took him 3 times coming up from Pennsylvania before he learned it. People that have trained their shoulders to do other things have to be retrained. For the rest of us, high school football, that sort of thing, then you don't have to worry at all about it. And this is another one, takes about maybe 5 minutes to learn this. And then there's no pain. I followed up on these people for up to 12 years now, getting MRIs every couple of years. It does not heal the supraspinatus most of the time. And some people do have a little more arthritis on that side than the other side, but they continue to be painless in all their movements. So that's the story of the rotator cuff. Other back pain things we take care of, too, with yoga. A herniated disc responds very well to extension postures like the locust and the bridge and the camel. When it comes to piriformis syndrome, that's something, it's a spasm of a muscle that entraps a nerve temporarily, but even though it's temporary, it can hurt like the dickens. And the yoga, by stretching the muscles of the buttock, including the piriformis muscle itself, relieves that pain a great deal of the time. Now, I also give injections there. Times I even give Botox injections into the buttocks. And they work very well, too. But with the yoga, as an adjunctive therapy, doing both, there's no reason you can't do both. It is extremely successful. There, the twisted triangle is good. The twists in general are good in order to heal them. Now, we've also used yoga, believe it or not, for weight loss, for insomnia, for bunions, for lordosis, an overarching of the spine, for plantar fasciitis, menstrual cramps, and that sort of thing. And other uses. I had one, a screen editor who had a terrible hernia, a ventral hernia. Her stomach pushed up through her diaphragm. Something was pushing up terribly, and I taught her a yoga method called Kriya, a Kriya called Nauli. It's a process rather than a position you get in. This woman, I saw her once, and she was a healthy woman. I think she had an elbow pain at first from editing. Then she came back, and she had lost 30, 40 pounds. And I was worried she had cancer, but she said, no, I have a hernia, and I can't eat because it hurts too much. So I taught her this method, and she came back. I didn't know that it would work, to tell you the truth, and I told her that. She came back 3 months later, no surgery, no medicines. She had gained back 25 pounds. It worked.
Dr. Fishman, you have convinced us that yoga is worth a try. Are there any criteria that our listeners should be looking for as they start to try to find a way to use yoga to feel better?
Well, yoga is perhaps 2,000 to 3,000 years old, and so is teaching yoga. I would say the most important thing is to find yourself a good teacher. Your first session might be in a very beginner class where you go up to the teacher, come early, and tell the teacher what's wrong with you, if anything. You have a stubbed toe, you have diabetes, whatever it is, so that they can adjust what they're doing for you. And if you find they're not interested, or they don't want to hear it, or they hear it but they don't make any special exceptions for you in spite of your conditions, then you might go to another studio next time. The yoga, as I say, the yoga teachers are under a fabulous disadvantage because they're not teaching it to one person. They're teaching it to a whole class. Unlike a first grade class where these are children sitting down comfortably and we all know how to sit, these are people doing things sometimes they've never done before. And it's a very difficult position for a yoga teacher to be in. I recommend they have at least one assistant for every 15 pupils. That's sort of a minimum. And so there are really no absolute contraindications because the yoga is so adaptable. It's one of the wonderful things about yoga is that there's so many poses that there's something just about for everybody. But you need someone who can properly assess you, detect what's wrong, and select what's right for you.
Dr. Loren Fishman, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to Dr. Loren Fishman. He's a physiatrist and he's medical director of Manhattan Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. He's on the staff of the Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons, and he's associate editor of the journal Topics in Geriatric Rehabilitation. His books include Yoga for Osteoporosis and Healing Yoga. His website, sciatica.org, has information about his books and research. You'll find a link to it from our website.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wadarsky is the engineer. He had help today from David Tripp. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
If you'd like to order a CD of today's show or any People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1043. That number again, 800-732-2334, online at peoplespharmacy.com.
When you visit the site, you can check out information on prescription drugs or herbal medicines and home remedies. You can share your thoughts on today's show.
And share your own feelings about yoga. We'd love to hear from you. When you go to the website, you can also sign up for our free online newsletter or the free podcast of the show. You can listen at your convenience or share it with a friend. It's all there at peoplespharmacy.com. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thanks very much for listening today. And please do join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to The People's Pharmacy.